Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Most people come to us, most doctors come to us because their practices are underperforming. I would say that it makes up about 80% of our newer clients, with the other 20 being doctors whose practices have hit a plateau. They've hit a point where they can't grow anymore. Now, normally, when we meet with a new client, we want to dig in and find out, why are their practices underperforming? And what are the usual culprits? Well, there's lack of retention, bad case acceptance, staff issues, efficiency or organizational issues, or lack of new patients. And there's always the outlier where you may have somebody on their team that's actively sabotaging the practice. But that is the outlier, but it does happen from time to time. Now, you'll notice I didn't necessarily list those things in any particular order, but new patients I didn't put at the top of the list, and there's a reason for that. Sure, new patients are important, and you should be focusing to get as many as you can, but it's usually not as big of, or it's not the problem for most offices, even though they might think it is. I did mention retention and case acceptance first, because that's usually the reason behind poor performance in most cases. And I've spoken about this before, especially the subject of retention. And, I've talked about it. I've gone over different formulas for it. But here's what I wanted to do for this week's episode. So I had a client newer to the program. They've been with us for a bit. They've had some success and they're doing well. But they still had some issues. So I was going over their numbers recently and I asked, hey, do you mind if I share these numbers on the show? Because I wanted to illustrate this point about retention, and they agreed. So for this week's episode, I want to show you what I found with this practice. I'm going to give you all the specifics and the actual numbers of this practice. And so it'll illustrate exactly what's happening. And I also want to go over what I recommended that they do to fix it. So that's what I'm going to do in this week's episode. We're going to go over, why you probably have a retention issue and how it's affecting your performance if you're a general dentist, and some ideas on how to actually fix this stuff. So my name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. So I'm just going to jump right into this. So let me describe the practice. This is a 2-doctor office in the Southeast. They have 2.5 hygienists, 3 dental assistants, an office manager who's pretty well through the MGE program, and 3 to 4 people at the front desk, a receptionist, a scheduler, a hygiene coordinator, and a new patient coordinator. Staff is top-notch. Great team, great docs, great assistants, really, really, really great people. Office is located in a strip mall, fairly high-traffic strip mall. And interestingly enough, they are completely out of network. They don't accept any plans. They used to, and they've actually gotten completely 100% out of network. Their average monthly production is I'm going to give the exact numbers, which is going to take my editors off here. $247,937. Their average monthly collections is $247,671. And their average monthly new patients is 53.25. Okay, so for the year, they're projecting out, because we're doing this mid-year, to do about almost $3 million, 2.97 in production, 2.97 in collections, and about 639 new patients. Not bad. This is a good office with 2 docs, 2.5 full-time hygienists. Well, actually, it's 2.5 isn't full-time. 2 full-time, 1 part-time hygienist, right? And their collection rate is 99.89%. I mean, you can't beat that with a stick, right? That's actually really good. Their best month ever was a little over $400,000. Okay, so looking at this office, there's a lot of things that are going right. Their overhead's under control. The office runs smoothly. Patients are very happy. They have tons of reviews. They're doing well. Looking a little bit deeper, there's areas I could always go, we could definitely improve your sales. We could definitely improve your organization. We could definitely improve your new patient conversion and tighten things up. And these are all things that would be on the wish list, right? We'd want to address all of these things, and we should, right? But normally when I'm trying to fix something or produce a large impact, I'm going to look for what's the big thing we could flip around right now? What's the one immediate action item that would change the whole scene? Well, this is where, digging into their patient base a bit, we found it. So they have their chart numbers are this. They have a total of 9,427 charts. Okay, and that's everybody who's been into this practice, all right? 5,760 are listed as active patients. 5,760, which leaves about 3,700 that are inactive. But that's 5,760 active patients. So now, if we then take a look at how many of these 5,760 active patients have a next visit date, which is easy to do in no matter what practice management software you have, whether it's Dentrix Ascend, Curved, EagleSoft. EagleSoft's a bit tough. You might have to call it EagleSoft, but they can do it. Or Open Dental. You can easily find this stuff. So we looked at, they have 5,760, 5,760 active. And how many people have a next visit date? There were 720 people with a next visit date. So let that sink in for a second. Almost 6,000 active patients, only 720 have a next appointment date. That means their retention rate is 13%. So think about that for a second. 13% of their active patient base has a next appointment date. So that right there is the big problem staring in your face. Now you might wonder, with so few patients with the next visit date, how are they keeping these 2 full-time and 1 part-time hygienist busy? Because this office open 4.5 days a week. Well, I told you these are sharp people. So they're seeing the new patients when they come in, and obviously the doctor's doing exams, one of the docs. They're doing great soft tissue management programs, so lots of scaling and root plannings, and they're doing their normal recalls. Yet there are some openings from time to time. So now, when we start running these numbers forward, if you go, okay, you got 5,760 active patients and 720 have a next visit, that means we have over 5,000 patients that don't have a next visit date, okay? So now, I want to give you an idea of the potential of this practice. Walk this forward with me for a second. So let's say I say 20% of these patients that don't have a next visit date, we're just never going to see again. I think that's a good average to estimate. So again, I'm going to use exact numbers, which again will take my editors off. They like when I use round numbers. So if we have 5,760 active, take away the 720 with the next visit date, that leaves us 5,040 active patients with no next visit. Let's get rid of 20% of those, just because we're going to assume we're never going to see these folks again. So what does that leave us with? That leaves us with times 0.8, 4,032 patients that are potential to reactivate and get into the practice. 4,032 patients. Now, if we then play these numbers forward, we go, okay, every one of these patients is going to need a hygiene visit, right? Well, how many hygiene visits at minimum are they going to need a year? They're going to need at least 2, right? So 4,032 times 2 is 8,064 hygiene visits. That's pretty good, right? Now, this office is open 50 weeks a year. They're closed 2 weeks a year. So let's divide 8,064 potential hygiene visits by 50 weeks a year. That leaves us with 161 potential recall visits per week. Okay, 161. If we divide that by 8, which is how many patients a hygienist is going to see on average per day, that's over 20 days of hygiene just in recall. This practice currently has about 10 days of hygiene. So, but that includes not just recall, that includes scaling and root planning, soft tissue management, as well as new patients. So 20 days of hygiene at 4.5 days a week is 4.5 hygienists. And that's just to handle recall. If we do what this practice has been doing and we're really active with our soft tissue management, we keep getting a good amount of new patients, that's really about 5, maybe 6 full-time hygienists. Right now they have 2.5. So what's happening is the growth engine for their practice has been stalled. That's essentially what we're looking at here. Now, and it's funny because what they run into from time to time is they'll have periods where there's not a lot going on, and then what do? They try to turn up the volume on the new patients, when meanwhile they have this huge unused resource, which is their patients of record that are just not being tapped at all. So to kind of give you the base numbers again, if I kind of got a little bit too specific there, we have an office that is only seeing 720 patients with the next visit date. Those are the only people that are regularly on the schedule. They should be able to recover 4,000 of their active patients that currently don't have a next visit date. And if they did, they'd end up doubling or more than doubling their hygiene flow. So I want you to imagine for a second, if you doubled your hygiene flow, what would happen in your practice. But there's also another little caveat I'm going to throw in there. One of the things we teach at the MGE Communication and Sales Seminars is something we call the scale of sales resistance, okay? Basically, it's, if you were to take 20% of your patients are going to be very easy to sell, 60% are going to be maybe a little less easy all the way to difficult, and 20% you just don't want to deal with in the business. We've talked about that in other episodes, right? These are the type of people you don't want in your practice, patients that are trouble. So that leaves 80% that are decent, okay? But of those 80%, the top 20 is great. The other 60 is the variance of, they're nice people, but they may be more difficult to handle. They're not easy patients to handle. So what happens in a practice like this, it's a busy practice, is the people that end up on the hygiene schedule are that top 20%. Because these are the easiest patients to schedule. These are the patients that are insistent on getting their next appointment. These are the patients, if you had to cancel their appointment because of weather, they'd be following you up to make sure that they got back on the schedule, your top 20%. Well, if there's no active follow-up going on to get your patient, your inactive patient base active, no one's actively following up on these people, what's going to happen is they're going to sort of drift off into the ether. And the only patients you're going to be left with are that top 20%. So then you're going to go into hygiene looking for treatment opportunities, and there'll be some, but there's not going to be as many as you think there should be because you don't have those patients that are harder to follow up, and those are usually the ones that have outstanding treatment. If you look at your outstanding treatment list, I guarantee you a lot of the people on that outstanding treatment list don't have a next visit date. But here's the silly thing about this. You go, okay, my practice is underperforming. What should I do? I could say, well, improve your sales, fine. But let's say your sales are fine. You can sell. But then you go, okay, I need to get more new patients. Sure, that's a great idea, but you have all these people that you've already gotten as a patient that already know who you are. You already have somewhat of a rapport. They already know, they can at least they can pick you out of a lineup. And nobody's doing anything to get those people back. Meanwhile, we're spending $1 bazillion to get new patients, which I think you should do anyway. Don't get me wrong. Spend that $1 bazillion, but spend maybe a quarter of $1 billion to get those patients that you already met back into your office, because it's also a lot easier to get those people back. They're also a lot easier to sell because they already know who you are, okay? So what am I doing with this office? What did I suggest? Well, being that we looked at this recently, right? We decided to kind of combo it with, something that's done in a lot of practices. Well, we just, there's always the use it or lose it campaign that you do at the end of the year. Use your benefits, they reset on January. Everybody does this, right? And hopefully if you haven't done it, you should do it. Even if you're out of network, do it, okay? So we decided, why don't we combo this inactive patient-based thing, reactivating these folks, with our use it or lose it campaign? Well, why not? Why don't we make that the kickoff, since we were approaching September when we first looked at this? And, normally these letters go out in the mid to late September and really start to heat up in October. So we're doing a massive marketing, for lack of a better word, assault on all of this to see what it gets us. So what does that consist of? Well, one, we're doing a series of actual snail mail letters. It's a series of 3 letters to these patients. The first ones will go out in late September, early October. Next one in late October, early November. And the last one in late November, early December. And it's a series of escalating letters, with some urgency. Hey, it's been a while since we've seen you. Your benefits run out. Hey, to the point of like, hey, last chance type thing. It's getting, the year's almost over. Those letters are also being turned into emails that are going to be broadcast emailed out to all of these patients, as well as we have a broadcast text campaign going to all of these inactive patients as well. And obviously, you want to be smart about this. We didn't just do responsible parties. You could, especially if you have multiple people in a household. But we wanted to make sure that we weren't, they weren't sending letters out to a, 12-year-old. We wanted to make sure at least adults were getting these letters. So you can always sort whatever lists you're pulling by date of birth, so you're not sending this stuff to kids, right? Same thing, just like when you call for a recall appointment. Then on top of that, we wanted to follow this up with a bunch of phone calls, which I'll get into in a second. But I want you to get this concept. So it's this massive thing: email, letters, texts. And the first series of texts are going to go out in early or late September, early October, and it's going to be a series of 3 or 4 texts, which will end sometime in late October, early November. And then it's starting again in mid-November, all the way into the beginning of December. In other words, we are just hammering the heck out of these roughly 5,040 patients. And the way the texts are set up is when somebody responds, they no longer get the text. Okay? Pretty simple system, right? And there's a service we're using for this. If you want to know more about it, you can email me here at jeffb@mgeonline.com. But anyway, so that's the idea, to at least go after these inactive patients. Now, here's the problem. Will we recover some people from this? Absolutely. I mean, what we're shooting for is to recover 500 patients with very few phone calls. That's the first thing we're shooting for, because they're not particularly overstaffed. But the problem with this stuff is normally texts, emails, letters, because we're using multiple vectors to hit these patients, with various different communication channels, we may get a little bit more effectiveness than maybe 10 or 20% response. But in most cases, the best you're going to do is 20%, where you'll get maybe the low-hanging fruit, the people that are ready to make an appointment. So if we pull 1,000 people off this 5,000 named list, first off, that would be amazing. These practices would be overrun, or this practice would be overrun throughout the end of the year. They wouldn't have a moment to breathe because they'd be so busy, right? That's great. But what about those other 4,000 people we haven't reached yet, right? Or haven't scheduled yet. So let's say we do this with 5,000, we get 1,000 scheduled, we still got 4,000 we haven't scheduled yet. Well, the only way we're going to actually get these other 4,000 people to schedule is by calling them. And this is where the second part of the plan comes in, and this is usually the toughest one to execute, okay? So I want you to imagine for a second, put yourself in this position, and this is how I was talking to these doctors about this. So let's say we do 5,000 inactive patients, we recover 1,000 via text, email, letter campaigns, which would be enormously amazing. Leaves us with 4,000. And by the way, I'll give you the outcome of this campaign after the beginning of the year. I can kind of tell you how it all turned out, because there's another little wrinkle we're trying as well. We're going to see how that goes. I'll tell you a little bit about it before we end off. Leaves 4,000 people that we haven't been able to schedule. Well, if we had to call 4,000 people, the first question I asked him was, well, how often do you think you should call these folks to get them back on the schedule? And they thought, well, I don't want to bug them. Well, it was funny because one said every day. The other one said, well, I don't know, maybe once a week. I'm like, all right, once a week's fair, right? Once a week. So 4,000 people, we want to call them one time a week until they schedule, right? And the truth is, until I reach this person, I have no idea why they're not scheduling. Some people get this frame of mind of, well, I called them twice, they haven't called me back. They've obviously found another dental practice. You don't know that. You have no idea. All kinds of things could be going on in their life right now. Their husband could have just left them. You don't know what's going on. There might be some reason they're not calling you back. Keep calling them until you reach them. Now, you might reach them and they say, I don't want to come back to the practice. I found another dentist. Fine. Or I don't want to come back to the office. Fine. Here's the only thing I'd recommend is that if that's the case and you're going to make a patient inactive, do not give everybody in the practice the power to inactivate a patient, because I've seen this horribly abused and tons of patients made inactive that then show up on their own later by somebody who was just very bad at reactivation. If someone has to be inactivated, you should have a little routing slip where you have the patient's name, why they want to be inactivated. It has to go to the office manager and the doctor. And you have to okay it before that person's made inactive. Maybe the OM has to click inactive on the patient. Because I've seen this happen in practices where they have a bad reactivation person who's just not very good at their job. They inactivate patients at random, and then the person just disappears. And the doctor and the office manager have no idea. And the way they found out is these patients show up later, and they go, I thought you had gone to another office. No, who told you that? So do not do that. Have a little routing slip made. It can be simple. It doesn't have to be really brilliant. It could just be the simple thing with their name and why they want to be inactivated. Goes to the office manager, goes to the doctor. Because the office manager may see this and it's like, Mary Smith. Oh, Mary wants to be inactivated? Why? Let me call her. And you call Mary, and Mary, I never said that. In which case you may have a problem internally. That's the only thing I'm going to recommend if you're going to make somebody inactive. Not to jump off on a tangent here, but important. So if we have 4,000 people and we want to call them one time a week, let's say we're open. We're going to call people 4 days a week, let's say. Okay? We want to call them one time a week. That's 4,000 calls a week, or 1,000 calls a day. Okay, so now, my background is from management and sales. If you're killing it and you're on the phone and you're selling, you're calling 150 people a day. But this is like somebody who is, a salesperson. They're calling, and they might be cold calling. Whereas if you're calling patients of record, I'm hoping you're reaching some people and talking to some people. So I don't expect you to make 150 calls a day. Might be closer to 75 if you're really hustling. So if somebody's making 75 calls a day, but I need to make 1,000 calls a day for the practice to reach my 4,000 patients a week, okay? That means I need, in order to reach everybody once a week, okay, I need 13 people. Sorry, I need to calculate it there. I'd done all my calculations before the episode and forgot that one. So I'll say that again. If I want to reach 4,000 people, or at least call 4,000 people once a week, and one person can call 75 people a day, I need 13 people to make 4,000 phone calls a week. That's insane, isn't it? It's crazy. And you know what? I've suggested these people bring on 2 or 3 people for reactivation. You can get people from the customer service industry. You can get people from other industries. And who knows? We're going to bring in a couple as soon as we can because it doesn't take a long time to train somebody on reactivation calls. We're also going to have staff within the practice spend a little bit of time every week, even the assistants a couple hours a week making these calls, and we've divvied up the list so that they can call these people so we can get some outreach going. I'll give you some ideas about that before we end the episode. But to really, the correct order of magnitude, the correct estimation of efforts here, if we really wanted to call all 4,000 of these people once a week, is I need 13 staff. So obviously, if I tell these folks, go hire 13 people, I don't think that would go over well. We kind of joked about it when we went over it. So we agreed on 2 or 3. Training them to make a recall appointment is very easy. Okay, that's not going to touch our 4,000, but it's going to at least start to make a dent. Now, let's say we get these 2 or 3 people on the job and they start to schedule people left and right. Well, this is obviously one of those jobs where if we're reactivating people and they're coming back, you're kind of working yourself out of a position. Do you see that? So if they get 1,000 people off and we're now down to 3,000, well, that's a lot easier to call in a week than 4,000 was, and so on. And obviously, some of these people are going to be main inactive, as we call them, or they've moved out of state or out of country or whatever. And you might go, well, what if they call the whole list and they get the whole list reactivated? What do I do with these people? If you've got people who have done that for you, there's obviously somewhere else you can use them in the business because they obviously have their act together and they're good. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, okay? But the idea is we're getting 2 or 3 people, in addition to what we have the staff doing on a part-time basis, to call these patients, as well as emails, texts, letters, etc., to kind of shake the tree to get these folks back into the office while we have our whole new patient campaign going on at the same time. Now, as far as how the rest of the staff are doing it, obviously the hygiene coordinator and the schedule coordinator are going to be focused on present time production more than anything else, but they have a couple hours a week where they're supposed to be calling inactives. The treatment coordinator for the inactives that they're calling is going to focus primarily on and this is the office manager part-time as well, on people who are on the incomplete treatment list, preferably larger treatment plans. The assistants are going to focus on whoever scheduler or the hygiene coordinator tells them is a good idea to focus on. But we have everybody in the office kicking in a little bit. I mean, how many phone calls is that going to get us a week? Maybe 200 or 300, 400. It's not going to get us where we need to be. When we add these couple other people, that's going to start to get us where we need to be as far as getting these patients back into the office. But that's the correct estimation of effort if we want to actually make this patient base active and get them back. Now, if we're doing that at the same time we're getting in a ton of new patients, which they're doing a ton of new patient activity, this should really start to show up in the numbers. There's going to be a lot of volume coming into that practice. And, the type of problems I like to see is, gosh, Jeff, I have 4 or 5 hygienists now. I need to hire another associate. You see? And that's what that volume and that flow will get you. If you have that activity going on and you have your sales figured out, we'll probably need to they'll need to get another treatment coordinator at that point to handle the volume. Well, then, and they've got the ops for it. Well, then things start to work out at that point. But the first place you start is you start promoting to these people from multiple vectors, which is what we're trying. Now, just as an aside, because they brought this up as we were talking, and I thought this was interesting, so we're trying it. Everybody's done the use it or lose it thing or campaign at the end of the year in one way, shape, or form. You've probably done it. So we're doing a kind of expanded version, right? Fine. But, I thought, a lot of people have dental insurance, so I thought, why don't you try this as a new patient campaign just for funsies? Let's see what happens. So again, I'll report back to you guys in January as to how all of this went between the text, emails, phone calls, etc., as well as the use it or lose it campaign for new patients. So what they did is they created some postcards, basically with the use it or lose it message on it. Dental insurance benefits run out. As of January 1st, most plans. So here are your options, and it has 3 new patient specials on there, like cleaning and exam and x-rays, and maybe either something off a full mouth or full smile makeover, like a certain amount of money off or something like this, right, or a second opinion. And they're doing this 3-4 times to their local area to see if that does anything. I have no idea if something like that's going to work. It just seemed interesting, so I'll report back. I thought it wasn't a bad idea. But again, marketing's like that. If you're right 9 times out of 10, you're brilliant, right? So hopefully this is one of those 9. Anyway, I'll report back on that one once it comes back. I'm a lot more confident in the basic reactivation campaign. And the idea is once this is done, once we've hit the end of the year, then we'll roll into the next campaign in January, but with that same degree of intensity, letters, emails, phone calls, texts, etc., until we've winnowed down this 4,000 or these 5,000 people who are unscheduled, assuming we get 1,000 scheduled before the end of the year. Now, one thing I should add, because this is kind of important, from a triage perspective, what would you do if somebody has a bunch of injuries, but they're actively bleeding? Well, the first thing you would do is staunch their bleeding, right? You got to get them to stop from bleeding out. Well, if you go crazy and you get everybody back in, let's get tons of patients back into the practice. We reactivate this one, reactivate that one. Yet they're walking out the door with the next visit. That sort of defeats the purpose. That's like filling up your cup and your cup has a hole in it. What's the point? So the other thing that we had to make sure of is that inside the practice, number one, they're handled, everybody's on the ball with regards to intake. So when patients start calling off these campaigns, everybody's on the same page and knows exactly what to do. Fine, that was easy. But then on the other side of it, no one can leave without a next visit. That's the first thing. That's just a big no-no. Okay, that can't happen. So we got to make sure that everybody leaving has a next visit date, whether it's their hygiene appointment or their next doctor. They should always have a hygiene appointment. It might be their next doctor's visit, right? Then on top of that, what do you do with cancellations and no-shows that are happening in real time? Where do those go? Because you got to chase those folks to get them back on for a next visit, or it starts to create this big inactive list again, right? So what we've done is we've isolated that traffic with the hygiene coordinator for hygiene appointments and the schedule coordinator for doctor appointments. If someone misses an appointment or has to call and cancel, they have them on this list and they're chasing that person in a nice way. Okay. Chasing sounds real bad. To make sure that they have a next visit date. It's not okay for someone to walk around without a next visit date. So if we can keep it where, look, you're always going to have some that fall through the cracks, right? But if we can keep it where 95% of the patients who walk in the door walk out the door with the next visit, and anybody who cancels or no-shows, 95% of those folks get a next visit, then we're in pretty good shape. While we start to reactivate people and we pour them into that situation, well, then we start building up a bigger and a bigger and a bigger office. Anyway, kind of run on about this a bit. I hope this helps. I wanted to give you some insight into what this actually looks like. So here's what I would challenge you to do. What are some action items? First thing I would do, grab your software, look at your total number of active patients, and look at how many have a next visit date. Then I would turn to the people who don't and work out how to get those folks back. If you listen to this in enough time, use it as part of your use it or lose it campaign. You can do emails, texts, letters, phone calls, etc. You can have all the staff doing a little bit of phone calls, have the treatment coordinator focus on patients who are an incomplete treatment list, etc. But everybody can call some people. But let's work on getting these people back. We can use it or lose it based on the time of year to at least work on getting them back. And then we'll have another campaign we can do in January to keep them coming back. But this is something that you should be working on with the same degree of intensity that you're working on new patients. And you'll find that it becomes very, very easy to make your goals every month because there's a lot of patient flow coming in. And most importantly, when you bring a patient in, the whole idea is that you're going to help them restore their oral health function and aesthetic, right? And your oral health leads to better overall systemic health and quality of life. So you're not going to be able to help them achieve those goals if they're not showing up. So that's sort of what I would be focusing on. Like, let's take the people who've already been to us and make sure that we're actually achieving our purpose with each and every one of those. That's pretty much all I have for you this week. What I'll do is I will update you on how this office did so I can give you some real-time numbers after the beginning of the year rolls around. We'll see how they did. I do hope this helps. Definitely, as I've mentioned, I've said this before, sales and retention are the two biggest problems that you see in general dental practices. And when those are problematic, people tend to look for other solutions, whereas those are the easiest things to solve immediate short and long-term productivity problems. It's also a good way to improve your patient's health. But again, hope it helps. If you have any questions about this, you can always email me at jeffb@mgeonline.com. And if you want to find out more about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we will see you at the next episode.